I'm going to be joined by Mary Colvin, who is with the Sunday Times, a reporter on some pretty fierce places. In fact, we spent a year chasing Arafat once. We eventually caught up with him.
He went to China. He didn't show up. I didn't go there, did he?
So, can you just tell us about, as a young reporter, the impact, or maybe before then, the impact this book had on you?
Yeah, well, I guess I come from, and it's really hard to follow those kind of speakers, because I never met Ed, but was just incredibly impressed, well, moved by reading his book as a young wannabe. I didn't get anywhere near Vietnam. I was, still back in school, marching around, saying no, no, But several things moved me. His passion. He was so passionate about it, but not in this way of, somebody who stands up and is self-aggrandizing. He was the opposite, self-deprecating. But what comes through, even in the jokes, the madness, is how much he cares. I mean, he writes about why he didn't go into politics. It was folly, greed, and hypocrisy. So why join any political party? Why join any ideology? I want to be a journalist. And he saw that as his way of striking blows, and he struck a lot of serious blows. And also, when I read that book, I thought, God, this is fun. Somebody pays you to go to strange places, meet mad people, and then you write about it. And it just seemed like it was very influential in that way of becoming a foreign correspondent. Didn't know I'd go to war at the time, but did end up doing that.
And the other thing, I think we discussed this earlier, is this kind of bare school of journalism, which is very different in many ways, isn't it, to the journalism that often goes on now.
Yes, he was very, and that's what, when I reread over the weekend, Anyone Here Been Raped and Speak English, what comes through loud and clear, the self-deprecation, the humor, the descriptions of the madness, because it's all the kinds of things that get left out. You might tell, you send to your editors the story, and then you tell your friends what really happened at the bar. But he really cared. He would go and check stories a million times. He would not listen to any government. In fact, the whole point of part of the book is he's always trying to get in somewhere that he's not allowed in, and it's very old school, and he just had no time for what he would have called, I suppose, navel-gazing pundits. He had no time for that. He just wanted to go there, see what is happening, talk about the people who were there, and report back. And what I really thought, I didn't know Ed, but is that I'd like to read some of his words.
Great.
Because that's what, if I can find my glasses here, that's what I think really matters. So I thought I'd read, well, just a brief bit about the title and his more serious things. And then you've got to hear some of his jokes. So, not jokes, they really happened. Let's go to, this is Congo, 60s, and he's there. He's there, and the Belgian refugees are in an airport where he arrives. And what I like is just absolute attention to detail. The sun was blazing hot outside. This is the title, this is the chapter, Anyone Here Been Raped and Speaks English. The sun was blazing hot outside, and even under the relative shelter of the aircraft hangars, the humidity was intense. Packed resignedly inside, thousands of Belgian civilians, mostly women and children, waited their turn to be airlifted out of the newly independent ex-Belgian Congo, out of Africa, into new lives in Belgium. Some had been driven out of remote, upcountry towns by the excesses of the Congolese soldiers and rebels on the rampage. Others had succumbed to the understandable fear. They fled, leaving everything behind save their pathetic bundles. Into the middle of this crowd strode an unmistakably British TV reporter, hey you guys out there, leading his cameramen and sundry technicians like a platoon commander through hostile territory. At intervals, he paused and shouted in a stentorian but genteel BBC voice, "Anyone here been raped and speaks English?" This was, I wish I could go on further, but I also want to read his Vietnam stuff. This was and this is where Ed, he contrasts that just ludicrous scene with, very serious and passionate thoughts. This is my first vision of Congo, that huge land which straddles the center of Africa and was later to be renamed Zaire by President Joseph Mobutu. The BBC's reporter's callous cry summoned up for me the tragic, wildly surrealistic nature of the country itself, where several rival ethnic groups, some of them in areas as big as France, and all totally unprepared for independence. I'd like to go on and read the sort of surreal moments there, but I think the Vietnam stuff is more important, and I'm limited on time. He's now, he covered everywhere from Angola to Cuba. Little known fact, he actually was taught a tango lesson by Fidel Castro in the early days. He was an extraordinary man. This is my favorite dispatch, and it's sort of long, which is why I've cut the "Anyone here been raped and speak English?" It says everything about him. Journalists were banned from, I think what Olivia was talking about, banned from Hill 875, and he got there. And he described being a war correspondent that you needed chutzpah, the ability to stay up for long periods of time, and low cunning. This illustrates all of them. He's gotten up to the front and was a bit easier than Iraq. You could actually jump on helicopters. This is Edward. All Thursday I had watched the medevac helicopters come in and talk to some of the wounded, including a medical officer with a hideous hole in his back caused by a mortar fragment, who described how, in one of the airstrikes, all of his medics had been killed, cursed with and this is real Ed, cursed with a vivid imagination I have always found, whether as a schoolboy waiting for a boxing match, or as then on the verge of entering a bad war zone, that anticipation made for the most pernicious fear of all. Very true. So, still in darkness the following day, I quietly left the press tent, i.e. leaving his colleagues behind, and went in search of a helicopter to take me onto Hill 875, where at least I would have something concrete to worry about. Luck was with me. Orders had gone out that no reporters were allowed on the hill, but a young black corporal, noting the Newsweek flash on my army fatigues, motioned me over and said, "You're from Newsweek? I read it every week. Hide in the bushes. When the coast is clear, I'll put you on the first chopper going." Having made up my mind for me, the corporal was as good as his word. A few minutes later, I was sitting on a load of explosive satchel charges, grimly hanging on for dear life as the Huey swung upward and over the hill. A mere 5 minutes later, after skimming the treetops, we came down in a clearing at the base of the hill. Not properly prepared landing zone I was used to, but a rough hole in the jungle, originally caused by extensive mortar fire. Nor did we really land. With inches to spare, the helicopter hovered between the trees, a few feet from the ground. I jumped out. The helicopter crew started gingerly tossing the satchel charges to the troops below. I had arrived on Hill 875. From then onward, for the rest of Thursday, which happened to be Thanksgiving Day, I have total recall. First, I scrambled from one bunker to the next, trying to reconstruct the actual story of what had happened from the beginning of the ambush. And that's what he did. He went there and he goes foxhole to foxhole. My concern became entirely practical. How to keep my notes together, how to keep them legible, how to avoid shedding helmet, pack, gas mask, which a burly black sergeant insisted I carry in case gas was used later on. There was an intermittent thud of incoming mortar shells. I'm going to skip a bit to keep it. As I arrived, the company was preparing for a final assault on the hill, on which, in well-concealed bunkers, a small group of kamikaze North Vietnamese were still entrenched. "We're going up that hill," the sergeant said. "We're going to get ourselves Hill 875. "Are you going up with us?" he asked. I nodded. I'm going to have to cut as I go because it's too long. The first wave of troops emerged from bunkers and moved up the hill. There was a good deal of cursing and swearing. I followed at a distance of about 20 yards, picking out the biggest, burliest trooper I could find. But as the line of troops started moving up the hill, the North Vietnamese, from their relatively safe position a mile away, started bringing down a rain of mortar fire, regardless of the now continuous, deafening airstrikes on all sides of the hill. There was an explosion ahead of me. The man I had chosen to hide behind had been killed. Moving at a slightly different angle up the hill, I picked out another advancing rifleman. He too was killed a few minutes later. I suddenly felt very much alone. And it goes on like that. I mean, it's extraordinary. Then he gets competitive. This is real journalism here. He's managed to survive. Someone gave me, he wants to get on a plane back, helicopter back. Someone gave me a police dog to hold. Its handler had been killed. I turned to another soldier and said, "Hold this." My instinct was to get off the hill as soon as possible, because as the helicopters began their shuttle back, some of my colleagues started arriving. And I wanted to get my story in time for that week's deadline. But the evacuation of the wounded came first. To help speed things up, I became briefly a stretcher bearer, helping carry them. It's that just, I love that combination of the serious and on-the-ground reporting and just this sense of humor. Okay, shall I just do a few that were
we're going to bring
jokes.
you back for the last one. You've got a joke. Okay, we'll let you have
I've
a joke.
got to do a joke.
You've got to do a joke. You have to have a joke.
Well, there's just so many. I had to cut it down. But this is when even Edward Baer thought American journalists went too far in their desire to check the facts. Admiral Tom Brady, whose anguish, this is Algeria, anguishes at the excesses and brutalities we're compelled to write about in Algeria, had a almost caricatural concern for minor facts. One weekend, FLN terrorists blow up a popular jazz club. 16 Europeans are killed, 150 more injured. Tom, the New York Times guy, and Ed get there an hour later. And he describes the scene. Many teenage girls there had their legs blown off. This is a joke. All that was left of the orchestra were bits of bodies, including, I remember, some outsized black shoes with feet in them. The walls were splashed with fast congealing blood. Brady took one look at the Rorschach-like stains, turned to a gendarme, and said in his fluent but strongly accented French, "Is that blood?" "It's not red wine, monsieur," said the gendarme gravely, at which, incredibly, Brady touched the spot, looked at his blood-stained finger, and licked it. It's New York Times fact-checking.
Thanks, Marie. Thanks very much. Oh dear, I'm in trouble.